Moving to Live is a podcast about movement and exercise. We bring you interviews with professionals in the movement and exercise field. The goal is to provide information for other professionals and also amateur movement aficionados, people who understand that movement is part of what makes life complete. Some of the people we interview you will have heard of. They're well known in and outside of the movement and exercise profession. Others you may not have heard of, but they have a great deal of knowledge to share. Many people doing the best work spend their time working with people, not working on their social media presence. We're going to give you a chance to learn from some of these talented and knowledgeable individuals, and we're going to learn along with you. Moving to Live podcasts are going to be short. Each interview will be long enough to impart usable information, but short enough to be able to be consumed in a single bout, during your workout, commute, or even during dinner prep. We all like long-form interviews, but time is valuable. Moving to Live wants to give you the option to learn and be entertained without needing to commit 60 minutes at a time for an interview. Give Moving to Live a listen. Check out our sister podcast, FitLabPGH, which highlights people, businesses, events, and activities in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area that make movement a priority. Moving to Live would love to hear from you. Want to connect with us or have an idea for somebody you think we ought to interview? Drop us an email, mov2liv@gmail.com, or connect with us on Instagram and Twitter, both _mov2liv. We're excited to bring you these interviews, and we think you'll enjoy each and every one that we bring you. Moving to Live, along with our sister podcast, treats movement as a lifestyle, not just an activity. With Moving to Live, we try to bring you good interviews where you get information that tells the story of movement professionals, as well as what they do professionally, so you can learn something personally and professionally about them. Today, we're back with part 2 of our interview with Nate Dunn of Data Driven Athlete. Again, a big thank you to Chris Yanakos of Pittsburgh, who connected us. Last episode, you heard Nate talk to us about his path to becoming a cycling coach, including his battles with dealing with a chronic liver disease. Today, he comes back and talks to us more about what he does in his career as a cycling coach. And I think Nate really exemplifies what it is to be a true movement professional. Whether you're a cyclist, a cycling coach, or a coach in any realm, I think you can learn a lot from this conversation, and I appreciate Nate taking the time to share it with us. So now, please enjoy the interview. Welcome back to part 2 of an interview for Moving to Live with Nate Dunn. We interviewed him 2 weeks ago. He is the owner and coach of Data Driven Athlete. He talked about his progression of life from a team sport athlete, singing in a very high-level choir in college while still being an intramural athlete. We laughed a little bit about the fact that most of us who have played intramurals remember back that it was like the 7th game of the World Series with the games we were playing, and then gave us a little background on his experiences as a liver person with chronic liver disease who underwent a liver transplant and how that changed him. We're going to come back this week, talk a little bit more about Data-Driven Athlete, talk about the use of technology, and really find out about the fact that he had mentioned 2 weeks ago that what he really liked to do is teach. And I think what people forget is coaches are probably some of the most important teachers out there. So Nate, I want to thank you for coming back and talking to Moving to Live for part 2.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Ben.
I think one of the interesting things that you said in the first interview when I was listening to it is the fact that you were not a cyclist growing up, and then you jumped on a bike and entered a race kind of on a whim and realized that this was a really cool thing. I think what a lot of people miss as they get older is they miss the fact that if they were involved with sports as they were growing up, the camaraderie and the fact that you can improve yourself doing things and see changes in yourself is unprecedented and valuable. And cycling, I know within the last couple of weeks of doing this interview, there was an individual who I believe was 90 years old who got some publicity for failing a drug test, but he's 90 years old and still racing competitively. So I think it's important to emphasize that something like cycling, as opposed to many of the team sports, it's a lifetime sport. So, you've got the good chance to be around another 40 years or so or more competing as a cyclist as well as coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those sports that, oftentimes it's a refuge for a lot of people from team sports that maybe have banged up knees or that, they've got some other chronic injuries that on a bike, they're able to kind of manage those and still enjoy the intensity and the competition.
And I'm curious, just because I'm always curious with people who coach non-team sports, what's the youngest age of an athlete that you'll work with? And then what is the oldest athlete that you have worked with?
So, I would work with, or I have worked with some younger junior level, junior age riders under 18. I've also talked some parents out of not coaching their kids at that age.
Let's kind of revisit that for a second. You've talked people out of hiring you and paying you money.
Yes, I've talked to some people that are like, I want you to coach my kid. He's 15, blah 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 blah. And my usual spiel is I'm willing to have that conversation with you, but I think that you need to, cycling can be a very solitary, very lonely sport, and it really runs counter to what kids at that age want to do, right? So that's one of the reasons why USA Cycling really tries to encourage participation in like BMX. Because BMX is, enables people to hang out at the track. They can do a short race. They can hang out. They can have fun. It's really kind of more of a team sport atmosphere. So I think oftentimes, parents, they're like, hey, I want my kid to race, blah, blah, blah. He's really motivated. He wants to race. He's willing to train. And the reality is that for most kids, they just need to have fun. And the idea of training on the bike and going out and doing intervals by themselves and that kind of stuff, save for the very rare kid. And even if you have that kid, I think you still have to really treat that situation with reverence and to say, okay, maybe we'll do like one workout a week. And then the rest of the time we want to try and introduce these different, foundational training principles in a way that's really fun and that doesn't feel like you're training. And, so I think and there's been a lot of research on this too, in terms of the idea that you need to specialize a kid at a really young age in order to, help them achieve their best, just doesn't really play out. So the kind of coaching I do, which is really specific and, helping someone train and be more methodical in their lifestyle, it can be done with a younger kid who maybe is really involved in the sport, really wanting to improve and get better. But I think it should be done with a different level of caution than you would have with a 22-year-old who's jumping in. So I've coached junior riders before, and then I think the oldest rider that I've coached has maybe been 65. So obviously a big spread in terms of maybe the different goals that those riders have, but those principles of progression, and I would say of conservative progression and training and all that kind of stuff, those all still remain the same. Those are those are the same. It's not it's not like it's two different worlds between that span of rider.
And people are listening to this, and I'm sure they're wondering, you coach athletes literally all over the country, if not the world. Is that correct? They don't have to just be in the Sacramento area.
Yeah. So probably at least half of my clients are across the country, a handful across the world and in different countries. So that's really what, without getting too much into the kind of nuts and bolts of how coaching works. But that's one of the things that's incredible about my job. So the first, when we talked previously in terms of, making this shift, I didn't mention this, but kind of one of my biggest goals and objectives is that I wanted to work from home. And I have a nice home office. If you hear kids screaming, they're getting their baths right now, and they're going to be having dinner here soon. So even though that can be chaotic at times, and anybody that works from home that has kids, I'm sure they can empathize with that. But the ability I have to be with my kids and to get them up in the morning, and it's really awesome. So working from home, being able to work remotely, then it opens up those opportunities to work with athletes across the world. And really, the only complication is a time zone. I mean, that's pretty much it. Now, it would be great to be able to, my local clients, I'm able to ride with them sometimes and have more face-to-face, which is obviously optimal. That's a ton of fun to get that opportunity, but it doesn't, I would say it doesn't limit the coaching side of it.
And I'm curious, I know you talked in the last interview about the fact that one of the things that drove you to really go into data-driven athlete and start to really consider what you were doing in your life was your struggle with liver disease and the fact that you were diagnosed with osteoporosis, and you make resistance training and weight-bearing exercise part of your activity. How do you deal with athletes that you're coaching who say, look, I'm here to get better as a cyclist. I'm doing this, this, and this as a husband, as a wife, as a worker. I've got time to cycle. I don't have time to lift weights, or I don't have time to do some weight-bearing exercise. How do you convince them that, yes, they do, and it might not only make them a better cyclist, but be better for their long-term health?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And I would say, first of all, I don't try to convince them. I feel like my role as a coach, and maybe it's because the people that I learn from, that I want to emulate, the approach is to say, here is some information. So, we have a blog post. I write on our blog, on our website, about different, common training questions, kind of common training topics. And that's really what that format is for, is it's for me to kind of make my case, or to thoroughly explore a topic, to try and explore all the recent research. So when an athlete talks about something like that, let's say it's osteoporosis, or let's say, bone density in cycling, is I can say, I can point them towards kind of a concise lay article, and that can be a point of discussion to say, hey, these are the real risks about cycling and bone density. And at the same time, I recognize that that might not really be on your radar, and that's okay too. But I've shared these resources with you, and this is my perspective on this. But I'm here to help you achieve your goals. And if someone comes and they say, yeah, I get it, but I don't really have that much time, and I have some high competitive goals, and I really want to achieve these, I'm there to help support them in that, to make sure that they're informed about kind of the cost and the benefit of those different choices, but to leave that up to them. So, cycling, bone density, those kind of questions, obviously it's a lot more, present for me on a personal level. But the reality is that, some people who naturally have higher level of bone density, or maybe they come from a sport background where they played football or something like that, and maybe that's not as much of a concern for them. So yeah, try not to convince. I try and just, try and have try and give them information if they're interested in it, and then kind of use that as an opportunity to talk about it.
And I know that coaching is a lot like personal training, and that there are a lot of people who take it very seriously, and there are probably an equal number of people who, well, I like to ride. I'd like somebody to pay me to design training programs. And for athletes who are looking for a coach, often they ride, maybe they're new riders like you were at one time, you hadn't come up through the cycling ranks, and they don't know what they're looking for. So for somebody who's listening to this podcast, what are these sorts of athletes that you look for? You think, I work really well with this type of athlete? And what are these sorts of athletes that you just kind of know from your experiences through trial and error? It's like, this person, they may need a coach, but I'm not the best coach for them because of my strengths and weaknesses don't match up with their strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah. So there are two other coaches that work with Data-Driven Athlete, Matt Chatleong and Sam Bassetti, and they're both really awesome guys. And one of the coolest things about kind of going from a one-man show to then adding on some other coaches is that part of our regular practice is to talk about these things. And, what kind of athlete do we want? What kind of athlete? And to run through everything from the process of onboarding an athlete to discussing different training topics and all that kind of stuff. So this idea about, the type of athlete, all of us, we talk about this in terms of the competitive goals are much less of an interest to us than the work ethic that somebody brings, right? So, they might have high level competitive goals in cycling, or they might be trying to lose weight and use cycling as kind of the primary way that they do that. Those different goals, they can both be, those goals are much less, I would say, the differentiating factor about whether or not that's a good athlete for us. It's about what they bring to those goals. So I would say, there are some athletes who I think view coaching, and I've had athletes contact me that view coaching as kind of like that's the ingredient that's going to get them to do an activity, or that's going to, get them to the next level. And I always try and talk that athlete out of coaching. And I always tell them, I say, hey, we're here to kind of capture what you bring to the table. But unless something is going to change in your life, like let's say if you're a really busy professional, unless something's going to change with that, or you're going to be reducing your job to be able to devote more time to your health, or unless something's changing in that equation, it's not likely that hiring a coach is going to make a really big dent in terms of helping you get to where you are. So, I oftentimes feel like I'm talking myself out of a job in some of these scenarios, but the reality is it's not a good fit for us either. Because when we have an athlete, we pour everything into that athlete. We used to offer kind of different tiered levels of service. And about 6 months ago, we talked about it and we said, it's really difficult to handicap the best way that you know how to help somebody, to basically say, and we recognize that not everybody feels they need kind of the top level of service. And that's fine. So we work to try and, kind of refer those clients to other people. But for us, what we want to do is we want to bring everything that we have to helping somebody get better and helping them improve. That's it.
And I'm curious along the same lines. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I know there are always situations where an athlete says, well, I don't want this coach anymore. And they either quit the coach or fire the coach. And you can read on the various forums. I'm interested if you've ever had the experience where you realize that, just working with this athlete doesn't work. This isn't a good fit for them. It isn't a good fit for me. Maybe for you, they're what I term an energy vampire, where they're just sucking the energy out of you and it's taking you away from your other responsibilities and joys. How do you handle that conversation? Because I think people who are in the endurance world who have coaches understand that's a very personal relationship. That's a close friendship and then some sometimes, because they're giving you a lot of information and they're placing a lot of trust in you.
Yeah, it's a difficult dynamic because in one way, I have worked really hard with our coaches too, to have, I think, the proper perspective, which is that coaching in some ways is a commodity, where it's a luxury item, and someone can choose to start coaching. They can choose to stop coaching. And that's not personal. It doesn't have to be personal. It can be simply a service that they choose to use, like Netflix. And then they can say, I don't want to watch Netflix anymore, or maybe I'm not really into the coaching thing anymore. But obviously, like you mentioned, what makes that difficult is that if we're doing it well and we're doing our jobs well, we're making a huge investment, and that is an investment that bears out in a personal relationship, in a supportive relationship. So that's where it gets difficult, right? So to your point, I think the best way that I've found to approach that is just to be honest with someone and say, I really don't feel like I'm not comfortable taking your money if I'm unable to help you achieve your goals. And that's an easy thing to see, right? Especially with data. It's very easy to look back over 3 months and to say, we haven't seen any movement in your performance, or maybe on the other side of that, maybe you've been unable to achieve the goals that we've discussed. And I'm saying this in all honesty, that as coaches, as us coaches at Data Driven Athlete, I really don't feel comfortable with that. When I look in and I'm like, I don't know if I could demonstrate to this person that they've improved in 3 months. I don't know. Maybe some people that doesn't bother them. They're like, keep sending me the checks, right? But for me, I'm like, I feel like it's my responsibility at some level to help guide a person through making progress, and to be able to demonstrate to them, data-driven athlete. Part of our process is to review what people are doing and to be able to demonstrate that progress. So, as you hear my son melting down. That's the joy of working from home. So yeah, it certainly is a difficult, kind of often touchy, and I don't know if we do it right all the time. I think we've done it right sometimes. Other times you wonder, I think where it also gets really difficult is sometimes I think people enjoy the friendship and they enjoy the support, and that's actually worth the value to them. So where do you place that as a coach? That's where it gets really difficult. Maybe the person really isn't, maybe it's not even really about the numbers and improving in the sport. Maybe they really appreciate the guidance that you're able to give them. And then we have to say, well, that's not really the business that we're in, but I don't know. So yeah, it's a difficult piece.
I'm curious along the same lines. You probably have some people who approach you who clearly they know what a coach can do, which one of the main things is look at what they're doing objectively and objectively be able to say, do this, don't do this with less emotion in the person. But there's going to be other people who maybe have some competitive goals and they don't understand. They're listening to this, or somebody recommends them that they listen to this and they hear it and they don't understand, why does somebody need a coach? I can pick up a trade magazine and it has a training program, or I can buy a book in Barnes and Noble or another bookstore and I can follow that training program. Why is a coach better?
Yeah. So I love this question. It's on my list of blog post topics. And I had this thought the other day, right? Because you're setting me up here to sell myself. And this is why I love this question, because my first response would be, of course you don't need a coach, right? Like, nobody needs a coach, right? Like the improvements in online training systems, and I don't know how familiar you are with kind of some of the automated coaching services that have gotten better and better, and they'll give you exercise prescription, training prescription, and lead you through the workouts, all that kind of stuff. The bottom line is that those are really great, and for a lot of people who if all you want is workouts and a training plan, you don't need a coach, and you should save your money and take your wife out to dinner. That would be my response, is that you don't need a coach. If all you're wanting is kind of training prescription is just a piece of coaching, and there are other platforms that do it cheaper and not as well, but pretty well, right? So, and we've kind of tried to make this shift in our coaching as well, and this is part of the shift we made towards not offering those lower levels of coaching, is that we wanted to say, here's what artificial intelligence and automated coaching and lower and internet forums, here's what they cannot compete with. And that is a dedication and a commitment to integrating exercise science, sports nutrition, accountability, personal investment in someone. It's the integration of all those things, right? That's the difference between a teacher and a mentor in a classroom and an online class, right? There are some applications where an online class, I'm sure, works perfectly fine, and it works better for some people. So that's what we've tried to invest in, is to say, our name is Data-Driven Athlete. It's written into our code. Data is a big deal. Science is a big deal. But all these other pieces we want to continue to invest in to demonstrate how our coaching is really different from just a training prescription. So to kind of follow up with that, if that type of an approach to training is of interest to you, and if you feel like that could help take you to the next level, that's what coaching can and should provide. But if all you're wanting is kind of a simple training prescription, or maybe you're like, yeah, I hear him talking about all this stuff and I just want some workouts to do, then I would say, yeah, save your money, right? Save your money and sign up for Zwift or sign up for TrainerRoad and see how well you can do. And chances are, especially if you're new to the sport, you'll get better. You'll get better, up to a level where you won't. And then at that point, you can decide if maybe kind of coaching might be a good option.
I'm curious how people find you as a coach, because I'm in Pittsburgh. I found you from a friend, but how do you get referrals, or how do people locate you when they're looking for you?
Yeah, so that kind of gets to early on when I resigned from my teaching job, and we were basically living off my wife's income, and I had time, but I didn't have a lot of money in terms of marketing. And so my commitment was to creating really, really good content for my website. To serve as something that people could share and that would improve our search rankings on Google and all that kind of stuff. So, for the past 7 years or so, that's kind of been my approach, is to say, I'm going to continue to invest in and trying to create, some of the best training content out there. So that's definitely a big part of it. A big part of it is, I would say that's the biggest marketing piece for us, from either people finding us on Google or from, becoming familiarized or, recognizing us, recognizing our brand because maybe they read a training article that we had posted or whatnot. So I'd say it's kind of multi-pronged. It's having read some of our training articles and knowing that, to obviously local writers. There's a local reputation that we have where people recognize, know what we do. So a little bit of a combination of those.
And I'm also curious, you have in your name, and you've alluded to a couple of times, you are a data-driven coaching company. What is the requirement for somebody to come work with you with data? Do they have to have a power meter? Or if you have somebody who comes to you and says, hey, I just got a heart rate monitor, I don't want to buy a power meter.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, this question is infrequent. I don't think I've had anybody in the last 3 years maybe that hasn't had a power meter. But if they do, again, my response to them is, I'm going to be honest with you. I can probably only give you about 50% of what I feel is my best coaching without a power meter. So if you want to go forward with this, that's certainly something we can do. But what I tell people, I've told clients this before. I said, potential clients, I said, I think you would be better off saving your money and buying a power meter and then coming back and doing coaching, or deciding if coaching is something that you want. I think your investment in the power meter would have a more long-lasting effect. Plus, it would enable you to actually fully utilize, coaching in a way that I just don't think you can do without it. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of other pieces there, but I feel guilty coaching somebody without a power meter because I pull up their data. I joke with clients about this. Maybe when their power meter goes out, and I pull up their data file, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, your heart was beating fast." Good job. I mean, and obviously there's other ways to, there's ways to look at other things. But the addition of power in a cycling file is like, it transforms everything. It transforms the process by which we coach. It transforms really the accountability that an athlete has for their coach, right? Because they can say, hey, I've done every single workout you've given me for the last 2 months and I haven't improved. That's your insurance policy as an athlete, right? To say, I've done everything you told me, I'm not getting better. Like, what's the deal? And as a coach, you should be like, oh, yeah, like you should be looking at those same numbers to say, I need to either mix things up, or maybe there's another life factor that's going on here that we need to look at. But power is kind of that's that commonality that allows someone to get their full money's worth out of coaching.
And I know we're going to have a lot of listeners who are not cyclists and don't understand that. If you're a runner who's listening, or maybe you're a master swimmer, why is it that power meters are so useful in cycling? Whereas if you're a runner, maybe you're just using a heart rate monitor and on occasion getting a blood lactate test.
Yeah. So, running has power. Power has come into the sport of running in the past couple years. It's a different type of measurement of that power. It involves more math, whereas, more math and kind of voodoo, whereas in cycling, we have what's called a direct force measurement of power. But running and swimming, if they had the option, they would love to have something like power to guide their training, right? It's just that in cycling, we have this advantage where all of our effort is translated into a machine. It goes through a machine. So every other sport out there is either actively every other sport, every other team sport, every sport is actively looking for some way that they can most objectively measure intensity. So for basketball, you'll see basketball and football, you'll see GPS tracking devices that are trying to quantify workload and trying to quantify the difference in workload on smaller players, point guards, as opposed to larger players. The same thing in football, right? So there's different systems, and I'm much less familiar with that since it's not the world that I'm in. But every single sport is basically looking and saying and wishing, I wish we had something like power that we could use, right? And different sports have done that to different success, to varying success. So yeah, power just gives us this totally objective measurement of intensity that helps to normalize all the other variables that come in there if we're looking at something like heart rate, right? So obviously power is immune to to wind, to caffeine, to hills, to any other variable that can kind of impact heart rate or kind of give you introduce a lot of noise into trying to examine a workout. Power helps to just say, no, this is you did 200 watts for 5 minutes. And that always means the same thing.
We're talking with Nate Dunn. He is the owner of Data Driven Athlete, a cycling coaching company. I'm curious, with the emphasis on data and technology that you clearly have, what, if anything, you use or suggest for your athletes to use on the recovery aspect. I know I've had the good fortune to talk to Don Moxley and Dr. Ian Dunn on this podcast about sleep and recovery. Do you use anything with your athletes so they can measure recovery or sleep quality?
Yeah, so a good question. So I'm always interested in reading about the different devices out there. I'll give you my personal opinion. If an athlete came to me with a device, and I've had a couple of athletes with devices that are interested in measuring their sleep quality, and if that's something that they want to record and kind of measure, we can definitely look at that. For me, how I've kind of settled, at least on the sleep quality thing, and maybe this is just my own personal biases, but I think that if I were to add the additional kind of discipline of measuring my sleep, I think that would add more stress and anxiety to kind of my overall life system, than leaving that up to the ether, right? So I know that might be heresy coming from somebody who's data-driven athlete, but for me, I would much rather have a conversation with an athlete about sleep hygiene and about different lifestyle choices and nutritional choices that they might make to help to improve their quality of sleep, and then to be able to observe those improvements with a little bit of distance, as opposed to getting this really granular look at their sleep quality and how much REM sleep they've done. To me, again, that seems to add an extra, like, oh shit, did I only sleep, like my sleep quality wasn't as good as last night, but if an athlete comes and they really want to engage in that, then we'll do it. We'll look at it, but we don't. That's not something that we are. It's not like power. It's not like a power meter on a bike. I'd say it's kind of accessory technology that if they're interested in, or if they come really excited about it, definitely engage in it. But I think that again, for me personally, it's kind of one of those ones where, like, oh man, that might be a little bit too much. But I've had a lot of people say, I love it. I love being able to look at my sleep quality. And
And I think that's the interesting thing, that different people can have different opinions and neither of them be wrong. I know for me personally, it hasn't been a stressor. I've started, after interviewing Don Moxley last spring, I've started measuring HRV and just recently got a Oura ring. And for me, it's not a relief, but it allows me to look at it objectively. And when I don't get a good night's sleep and I go back and look at other things, it's like, oh, that's why. So I think it's interesting that you and I are kind of at opposite ends of the spectrum for different reasons.
Sure. And it could be that because I'm also wary of adding additional data to the cyclist diet, right? It's like when they're on the bike, they're recording everything, every heartbeat, every pedal stroke, everything. And I think that then you can go down another end of the spectrum where you're like, hey, let's leave the bike, let's leave all the data, and then let's disconnect from that. And like you mentioned, that could be different for different people.
Anywhere you think the technology is going or changing, where you would like to see something that you're able to measure in, say, 3 to 5 years?
Well, there's certainly been interest in kind of measuring real-time blood lactate levels. Also, there's been interest in, kind of portable expired gas analysis machines, like VO2 max machines. I've seen some of those kind of out there. Essentially, I think probably what the next step is that with power, we're measuring work intensity. And the next step is to, measure some of those physiological parameters that are maybe, contributing to that outcome of power. So the degree to which that matters, I don't know. Again, I think everyone is every coach and every athlete is going to have to make these decisions in terms of at what point am I better off kind of simplifying my perspective when I'm training and just not looking at anything? And then are there some training sessions where maybe it's helpful for me to bring on these different technologies and whatnot? So the challenge is with those additional technologies that are measuring kind of, physiological parameters, those are a lot more invasive. They either require you to wear like a sleeve on your leg, or obviously you have some kind of breathing apparatus. So they add this additional cognitive load to exercise. Whereas, the beauty of the power meter is that it's just on your bike, right? And it's just, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to think about it.
I'm curious how many athletes that you work with that have more than one power meter, because we all know that most cyclists have multiple bicycles.
Yes. So this is one of those funny questions where, people ask me, do you think I should get a power meter? Let's say they have a power meter on the road bike and they say, do you think I should get a power meter on my cross bike? And I always say to them, I say, okay, first of all, I think I love a power meter being on every bike that you ride. But they are an expense. And so that's usually kind of the question of like, as a data person, I love the ability to quantify the mountain bike ride and the cross ride and the road ride, and then the time on the time trial bike. I love that. It gives you this flexibility in training to where, each of those bikes is still, feeding back into the loop. But cost obviously, is so if cost is a factor for people like it is for me, I only have one bike. I have one bike and I have one power meter. I have two bikes and I have 2.5 bikes. Okay.
The number keeps jumping up.
Yes. One's a frame set. I need to build it up, but only one power meter. So if cost, for most of us, cost is an obstacle. And I would say, put the power meter on the bike that you see yourself riding most often. That generally makes the most sense to kind of capture the most amount of training data.
You mentioned a few minutes ago that one of your ways of advertising was you make sure you put good quality on the internet with articles and blog posts, et cetera. And I know that with the advent of Google and everybody and his brother being able to put up blog posts, and unfortunately or fortunately with the expansion of social media, everybody's an expert. So if somebody's listening to this, what are your 2 or 3 tips if somebody's looking for a cycling coach? What are your 2 or 3 tips for recommending what they should look for to make sure that, okay, this person at least knows basically what's going on and is able to give good information rather than this person just doesn't know what they're talking and hung out their shield because they won a bike race last week?
Yeah. So I'll give you my spiel that I give to any new client that talks to me. And the first thing I tell them is I say, I want to pump the brakes a little bit. And I want to encourage you to look at other cycling coaches because, it doesn't matter. It matters much. I would say it's important for every athlete to be engaged with and to believe in the process of their coach, right? If you don't really believe that that's an approach, or that their kind of skill set is really the best for you, then you're probably not going to commit fully to their training prescription and you're not going to get as good of results. So I think even if you were really invested in a bad coach, you'd probably get better results than being marginally invested in a great coach. So that's usually my first spiel is to say, hey, if I'm the first one that you've come across, go out there and look out. And then this is going to get to answer your question is what I tell people is I say, decide what it is about a coach that you feel is important, right? Because like you mentioned, some coaches, their pedigree might be, they have an elite racing background. And then some coaches, maybe their pedigree is that they're really charismatic and they're on a lot of group rides and they're really good with social skills and engaging people and they're always on social media. And maybe that's something that you really like. Maybe you like that kind of hype and it helps to motivate you and you want to kind of buy into that. Other coaches come with a skill set of teaching and education or exercise science, right? So for us, the baseline qualification for coaching for us is to have a bachelor's degree in exercise science. So that's kind of where we've put our shingle, right? We've said we believe that that seeing the world as a coach through a lens of exercise science and that objectivity of exercise science is a great value for us. So that would be my response to someone is to look and see what is it that you value, and then look at that coach. Go to their website, read their qualifications, read what they've written on their website. Read, what is their philosophy about training? Do they have a really myopic view where they feel like this is the training plan or this is the training approach that's the best? And if that's the case and that lines up with you, then maybe that's a good fit. So do your research. That's really what I encourage people to do. Do your research. It's in your best interest to contact that person and to ask them all kinds of great questions, right? Like you're buying something from them. You're buying a product in its simplest term, and do your research, just like you would for a new set of Aero wheels, read the reviews.
We're talking to Nate Dunn. He is the owner of Data Driven Athlete, a cycling coaching company. I think he's given us some great information on the importance of power. I think he's given us great information on what he looks for when choosing which athletes to work with, as well as giving you some tips in the last couple of minutes about if you decide to want to hire a cycling coach, these are some things to look for and some things to consider. I think a really key point of that is the fact that he said, talk to a variety of people and figure out which one seems to be the best fit for you. Nate, I want to thank you for taking time to Moving to Live and telling us your story 2 weeks ago, and then giving us a little clearer insight this week about Data-Driven Athlete and specifically why you place such an emphasis on using technology to help make cyclists better cyclists.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on, Ben.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of Moving to Live. Make sure you check out the show notes for contact information for our latest guest, as well as links about all the things we talked about. Intro and exit music is Traveling Light by Jason Shaw. You can subscribe to Moving to Live on Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and Google Play, and be notified about new episode releases. Have any questions, comments, or suggestions? Drop us an email, mov2liv@gmail.com. Connect with us on Twitter or Instagram, both _MOV2LIV. Please tell your friends about Moving to Live. It's a go-to place for information for movement and exercise professionals and amateur aficionados who understand that movement is part of what makes your life complete. Until next week, keep on moving.